Good day everyone. Today I will discuss institutional-based correction. So, what is corrections? It focuses on rehabilitation and regards inmates as patients who need treatment and guidance in order to become productive and responsible members of society upon their release. So, corrections is the act or process of correcting. It is a change that corrects a mistake, change from wrong to right or from abnormal to normal. Correction is a change that fixes a mistake or a punishment to correct a fault. Penology, the study of punishment for crime or for criminal offenders. It includes the study of control and prevention of crime through punishment of criminal offenders. The term derived from the Latin word pona, which means pain or suffering, otherwise known as penal science, division of criminology that deals with prison management and the treatment of offenders. So, the penology, also called penal science, the division of criminology that concerns itself with the philosophy and practice of society in its efforts to repress criminal activities. Prison, a penitentiary and institution for the imprisonment, incarceration of person convicted of major or serious crimes. So, a place established for the purpose of taking safe custody or confinement of criminals. So, the prison is which people are legally held as punishment for a crime they have committed or while awaiting trial. Correctional facilities. Institutional corrections facilities includes prisons and jails. Prisons are state or federal housing facilities that confine convicted felons with sentences typically longer than a year. So jails are administered by local law enforcement and hold those with shorter sentences, usually for 1 year or less, and those awaiting trial. So correctional facilities is a place where people are kept when they have been arrested and are being punished for a crime. So these are two types of correction, which is institutional corrections and community corrections. So these are under institutional correction. First, we have prison. Prison refers to the penal establishment under the control of the Bureau of Correctional and shall include the New Bilibid prisons and other correctional institutions. So, prison is a building in which people are legally held as a punishment for a crime they have committed or while awaiting trial. Next is competent authority. It refers to the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, Regional Trial Court, Metropolitan Court, Sandigan Bayan, and the Military Court, including the House of Representatives, Senate Commission on Elections, Bureau of Immigration, and the Board of Pardons and Parole. So, a competent is the authority of a court to deal with specific matters. Competence refers to the legal ability of a court to exert jurisdiction over a person or a thing, property that is the subject of a suit, which it is competent to hear and determine the case. For example, if the court has appellate jurisdiction, so the case must have passed through the necessary preliminary stages before being eligible for consideration by that court. Next is inmate. It refers to the national prisoner or one sentenced by a court to serve a maximum term of imprisonment of more than 3 years or to fine more than 1,000 pesos. So, an inmate is a person who is confined to an institution such as prison or mental hospital, or a person who is deprived or of liberty against their will. Example of an inmate is a person who is serving a 5-year sentence in prison for robbery. Next is detained. A person who is confined in prison pending preliminary investigation, trial or appeal or legal process issued by competent authority. So detainees are individuals who are kept in jail even though they have not yet been convicted of a crime. So a majority of detainees are individuals who are unable to obtain sufficient funds to post bail and therefore cannot be released from jail pending a trial on the criminal charges. These are the persons known as pre-trial detainees are ordinarily held because they are unable to satisfy the financial requirements for a bail bond. Next is death convict. It refers to an inmate whose death penalty is imposed by a regional trial court, which is affirmed by the Supreme Court in Bank. So, death convict is a sentence condemning a convicted defendant to death. It is an affliction or a situation that is considered to be fatal, also prognosis of death. Next is superintendent. It refers to the one in charge of prisons. Superintendent is a person who manages or superintends an organization or activity, and the one who has the oversight and charge of a place, institution, department, organization, or operation, specifically the executive head of a police department. And it is a high-ranking official, especially the head of a large urban police department. Next is carpeta. It refers to the institutional record of inmates which consists of Mitomos commitment order, prosecutor's information, and the decision of the trial court including the appellate court. So, carpeta, also called the Inmate Management Information System, is a nationwide comprehensive case monitoring and information system that tracks the progress of cases or clients from one agency to another. Next is prison record. It refers to information concerning an inmate's imposed criminal case number in the trial and appellate courts, that the date when the service of their sentence commenced, the date when the inmate received Mitomos commitment order for confinement, the place of confinement, the date of expiration of sentence, the number of previous convictions, and the behavior of conduct while in prison. So, prison records, especially those that are computerized and linked to central administration, can help develop prison policies based on concrete data and help to remedy critical issues such as penitentiary overcrowding. Registers also permit tracking detainees' legal situation and their behavior throughout their detention. Community corrections. It involves the management and supervision of offenders in the community. These offenders are serving court-imposed orders either as an alternative to imprisonment or as a condition of their release or on parole from prison. This means they must report regularly to their community corrections officer and may have to participate in unpaid community work and rehabilitation programs. Community corrections plays a vital role in the ensuring the safety of the community by rehabilitating offenders and diverting low-risk offenders from prison, which helps to break the cycle of reoffending. So, community corrections programs oversee persons convicted of a crime outside of jail or prison and are administered by agencies or courts with the legal authority to enforce sanctions. Community corrections include probation, correctional supervision within the community rather than jail or prison, and parole, a period of conditional supervised release from prison. So these are the advantages of institutional correction. Community corrections program offers some distinct advantages. The first is a cost issue. Compared to jail and prison, most community programs cost less. Offenders live at home and in a small number of residential programs where the offender lives at the facility. They help subsidize the cost of living. And also, these are the disadvantages of institutional-based correction. Disadvantage is that public safety may be compromised. Offenders are more easily able to continue criminal behavior than if they were confined in jail or prison. With funding going to jails and prisons, resources have not kept pace with community corrections growth. In 2018, the Philippines held the 6th highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries. As of 2019, the Philippines population rested at 108.31 million people and 215,000 of those people were incarcerated. Therefore, the Philippines has an incarceration rate of about 200 per 100,000 citizens. There are 933 prisons running in the Philippines. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. Below are 5 important facts about the incarceration system in the Philippines. So these are the 5 facts about the Philippines incarceration system. First, we have severe overcrowding. Rodrigo Duterte won the presidential election in 2016. He promised to end the crime within 6 months. This promise also included the killings of tens of thousands of criminals. Duterte's elections lead to the infamous war on drugs and, eventually, overcrowded prisons. Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that safely house 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. Similarly, a room designated for 30 people holds about 130 in the Quezon City Jail. This severe overcrowding in prisons leads to illness and death tolls in the thousands. So prisons overcrowding leads to increased violence, the inability to provide necessary medical care and other essential services, and degrading practices like requiring prisoners to sleep on the floor. These factors include poverty, a lack of education or employment opportunities, drug or alcohol use and abuse, racial disparity, exposure to others involved in criminal activity, and mental illness. Next is pre-trial detainees. According to the World Prison Brief, 71.1% of incarceration within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial. In 2018, 141,422 of 118,278 prisoners are pre-trial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. So, detainees, when someone is detained by the state while they are awaiting for a trial to determine whether they are innocent or guilty of a crime. Next is pre-trial detention. Is found in judicial system all over the world. In countries like the Philippines, people may serve time that overweights their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. So, pre-trial detention is a legitimate aspect of the criminal justice system. However, the right to personal liberty and the presumptions of innocence require that strict criteria must be met before someone can be detained prior to being tried by the court. The most famous gladiator battleground, the mighty Colosseum Arena in Rome, had a slave army of 224 slaves that worked daily as a power source of the complicated network of 24 elevators that transported gladiators and their wild animal opponents from the underground dungeons to the arena floor. So as you can see, their battleground is very overwhelming. It is made of stone and it is very powerful compound that no one can escape. The conditions in the European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. Henry II commissioned the construction of first prison in 1166 together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. So one of the most historic prison legislations was introduced in 1215 when King John signed Magna Carta, which stated that no one could be imprisoned without trial. During that time, prisoners started receiving more care. Concepts of rehabilitation was introduced and governments around the world, especially UK and US, started reconsidering their views on solitary confinement, which was primary source of the increased numbers of insane, suicidal and catatonic prisoners. Wars that engulfed the world in the beginning of 20th century brought the information of large amount of war prison camps and concentration camps. So most famous examples of those types of prisons happened during World War II, when Nazi government formed over 300 detention centers in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminals, and others were detained without judicial process. So, majority of them was eventually killed on an unprecedented massive scale that is today estimated to be between 11 and 17 million people. During the end of 20th century, modern prison system was finalized. Concept of probation service was introduced in 1991, and 3 years before that, first prison intended solely for the holding of inmates in permanent isolation was formed. Those supermax prisons became widespread across the entire United States, with over 40 of them being active in the year 2005. Inmates in those prisons are held in 23 hours long periods of cell isolations with occasional communal yard time work, educational programs, and meals in cafeteria. So as of 2006, it is estimated that over 9 million people are imprisoned worldwide, with United States leading in the rate of incarceration 743 per 100,000 people. So these are the different types of prisons. So you can see in their prison is overwhelming. Their jail is made of stone, and it's very powerful compound that no one can escape. Religion's role in prison. Religion's value in prison is often about its contribution to the individual growth or development of a particular inmate. The focus is to perceived role in religion in helping lower the chances of recidivism among inmates. Other reasons, it focuses on the immediate value that religions have for inmates through their help in their coping and survival. The influence and practice of religion in the correctional setting is as old as the history of prisons. Initial entry of religion into prison was probably carried out by religious men who themselves were imprisoned. Currently, many correctional inmates practice their religion on an individual basis or within the structure of an organized religious program. Religious programs are commonplace in jails and prisons, and research indicates that 1 in 3 inmates participates in some religious program during their incarceration. Next is high death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid Prison, NBP. According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, these deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, and inmate violence. At the 2019 Philippines Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. In addition to overcrowding, poor living conditions, and inmate violence, NBP lacked nutritional food and basic health care. On account of this living condition, Tamayo reports that at least one prisoner dies at NBP each day. So high death tolls is due to overcrowding, dirty living, and inmate violence. So this is the reason why many people died, because of no proper living, no fresh air, and no proper hygiene. And also lacks of nutritional foods and basic health care. Thankfully, politicians and prison employees are working to reduce overcrowding in the Philippines prisons. Human rights advocates have also called for the release of vulnerable inmates, hoping to protect them from poor living conditions. Next is vigilante justice. Duterte's war on drugs escalated during his presidency. Jobless citizens were recruited to kill anyone suspected of dealing, buying, or using drugs. This was one of few ways for some people to make money. Many homeless and impoverished people joined the vigilante teams. In 2016, Duterte told the public, "If you know of any addicts, go ahead and kill them yourself." Together, the Philippines Police Force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and users since Duterte's presidency in 2016. The Philippines war on drugs has created the belief that extrajudicial violence and murder are necessary to fight crime. But the Human Rights Watch has turned the narrative around in Duterte. They are publicizing information about the vigilante justice in the Philippines. So, vigilante justice often describes the actions of a single person or group of people who claim to enforce the law but lack the legal authority to do so. However, the term can also describe a general state of disarray or lawlessness in which competing groups of people all claim to enforce the law in a given area. Next is corruption. In August 2018, the public learned a former mayor may have been released from prison for good behavior. He was originally charged for rape and homicide in 1993. Similar stories of corruption in the Philippines prison continued to emerge. In September 2018, the public learned that a woman was told her husband's sentence would be shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos or $970. Later that year, senators stated that inmates could live like kings for free. So this information led to further allegations. Prisons workers and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contraband to inmates. The contraband in question included cigarettes, cell phones, and television. Supposedly, inmates can also pay for personal cooks and nurses. Inmates who cannot afford a better life within the prison are stuck in overcrowded and dirty rooms. So these inmates have a higher rate of becoming ill and of death. Now that the corruption has been unearthed, officials are taking steps to weed it out, one prison at a time. So it is a form of dishonesty or a criminal offense which is undertaken by a person or an organization which is entrusted with a position of authority. So in order to acquire illicit benefits or abuse power for one's personal gain. The abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Corruption erodes trust, weakens democracy, hampers economic development, and further exacerbates inequality, poverty, social division, and environmental crisis. The earliest records of prisons come from the first millennia BC, located on the areas of mighty ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. During those times, prisons were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons, where guilty or suspected criminals spent their life either awaiting death sentence or command to become slaves, or often working as galley slaves. Primary source of their detentions were not dungeons, high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. So some of the earliest form of imprisonment include prison facilities built during the ancient Roman era, especially those that are computerized and linked to central administration, can help develop prison policies based on concrete data and help to remedy critical issues such as penitentiary overcrowding. Registers also permit tracking detainees' legal situation and their behavior throughout their detention. The living conditions in early prisons were deplorable and many prisoners did not survive. So many prisoners were built underground with little or no light. So some were built out of bedrock and accessed by a trapdoor through which prisoners were dropped to all cells below. Their prisoners were held in a poorly isolated buildings where they could often be visited by their friends and family. Ancient Roman Empire, however, continued to use harsher methods. Their prisons were built almost exclusively underground, with tight and claustrophobic passageways and cells. So during the Roman Empire, Roman prisons were used mainly for holding prisoners condemned to death. So private prisons called carcer privatus would be used to hold debtors. There was a public prison called Custodia Publica, which held people awaiting trial. Ancient Rome threw prisoners into the Colosseum to die in staged battles or be eaten by wild animals. Brutality was the norm through the Dark Ages. One of the most famous uses for the slaves in Roman Empire was the gladiators. So a Roman gladiators was an ancient professional fighter who usually specialized with particular weapons and types of armor. They fought before the public in hugely popular organized games held in large purpose-built arenas throughout the Roman Empire from 105 BCE to 404 CE official contests. In addition to fighting in the arena, sometimes after a lifetime of training in the special gladiator training houses or luduses, many slaves were tasked as a support workforce that enabled smoother run of the popular gladiator business. So this is the most famous gladiator battleground, the mighty Colosseum Arena in Rome, where gladiators under wild animals opponents from the underground dungeons to the arena floor. State prisons. State prisons house offenders who have committed state crimes such as assault, arson, robbery, or homicide. Each state has its own unique legislation regarding the prison system, and the differences from state to state can be vast. So, state prison is a prison maintained by a state, especially to incarcerate those convicted of serious crimes, and it is a secure facility managed and run by a state in which an individual convicted of a crime is confined. Federal prisons. Inmates held in federal prisons have been charged with federal crimes such as drug trafficking, identity theft, tax fraud, or child pornography. So a federal prison is operated under a jurisdiction of a federal government as opposed to a state or provincial body. So federal prisons are used for convicts who violated federal law. So inmates considered dangerous or those sentenced to longer terms of imprisonment. There are 122 federal prisons throughout the U.S., housing more than 151,000 inmates. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, many different factors are considered when determining which prison an offender will be assigned to, including their offense and past criminal record, mental and physical health, and proximity to family. Minimum security. These prisons, sometimes called Federal Prisons Camp or FPS, have the lowest level of security and are used to house non-violent offenders with a relatively clean record. So federal prisons can be one of 5 levels of security, with each level designed to best meet the needs of its inmates. Low security. Low security facilities still have a strong orientation toward inmate work programs, but they also have perimeter fencing and a higher staff to inmate ratio than FPCs. Some of these prisoners may have a history of violence, but they must have less than 20 years left on their sentence to be placed in a low security facilities. So low security federal correctional institutions have double fence perimeters, mostly dormitory or cubicle housing, and strong work and program components. The staff to inmate ratio in these institutions is higher than in minimum security facilities. Next is medium security. Medium security federal correctional institutions or FCIS are much more likely to have violent offenders as inmates. This is the security level that moves to cell-based housing, more rigorous treatment programs, and perimeter fencing that often includes razor wire with electronic detection system. So medium security FCIS and USPS designated to house medium security inmates have strengthened perimeters of and double fences with electronic detection system, mostly cell-type housing, a wide variety of work and treatment programs, and even higher staff to inmate ratio than low security FCIS, and even greater internal controls. Next is high security. High security prisons are also called United States penitentiaries or USPs. As you might imagine, they provide the highest level of security where inmates are closely monitored by guards and cameras. USPs are surrounded by razor wire fencing or walls, and most also have watchtowers. So high security prisons are also called United States penitentiaries or USPs. So high security institutions, also known as United States penitentiaries USPs, have highly secured perimeters featuring walls or reinforced fences, multiple and single occupant cell housing, the highest staff to inmate ratio, and close control of inmate movement. Next is administrative. This special class of prisons encompasses other types of institution designated to house inmates with special considerations, such as those who are chronically ill, extremely dangerous, or a high escape risk. So, administrative facilities are institutions with special missions, such as the detentions of pretrial offenders, the treatment of inmates with serious or chronic medical problems, or the containment of extremely dangerous, violent, or escape-prone inmates.